All right.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Anderson. I'm the Director of Career Services at the college. And we'll be joining you for about an hour to talk mostly about resumes and resume writing, a little bit about cover letters, and a little bit about the platform we use for job and internship postings, which is called Handshake. So I'll go through all of those things. Before we get into the content right away, a couple things I want to let you know. I'll hit you with lots of information, and don't panic. You don't have to do it all this minute, but you do have a resume assignment that is coming up where you need to submit. After you hear my comments, you're going to go back, start a resume, update a resume, and submit that by Sunday, I believe. Is that right, Katie? Yeah. And you'll be sharing that to an email address called resumes@css.edu. And then we will try to get feedback to you within 2 or 3 days of when you submit it to us. So you can get that feedback, do a round of revisions before you have to submit it for your assignment. So one, don't panic. We're presenting a lot. We're here to walk along with you. So if you have questions after the presentation, you have some unique circumstances, you can reach out to me anytime to ask those questions. Resumes really are, sort of this living document. And I always say, like in an ideal world, we'd be updating it once a year, once a semester, adding new jobs, adding new credentials. But I'm much better at telling you to do that than doing it myself. I know how hard it is. It moves to like, I'll get to it, I'll get to it. So one of the beauties of this class is you're forced to do it. It's integrated into your class, which is actually great because you want to be doing that anyway. So some of you have done lots of resumes in the past. I'll give you feedback and tips from my perspective. Some things change over the years. Some things have stayed really consistent. In the end, you take feedback from several places, including what I'm sharing with you, and then you're creating your own document that you're really proud of. You're proud of what you're sharing and the way that you're formatting it. So there's no one perfect and right way you have to do a resume, rather lots of tips and suggestions. The other thing is a reminder going forward as your career as a CSS student, you can reach out to us for other questions. So sometimes I'll have students say, I have an interview coming up. Can we hop on Zoom and would you give me some tips? Or after you graduate, you still qualify for our services for 3 more years fully. And then even after that, you can reach out to us for 3 appointments. So let's say you graduate and then a year after you're changing jobs or applying to something new, you can still reach out to us for assistance. So keep that in mind as you go through. I will pause periodically when I present to make sure if you have questions. I'd rather do that in chunks so we can answer and address those as you're thinking of the questions. Okay. Anything else, Katie, about the assignment that you need to share or you want to share?
Um, I don't think so. I think this is just that first initial take at it. So don't, like I said, like Mary said too, don't feel a ton of pressure. They're going to give you great feedback on that first draft that you submit. So tonight, just take it all in, and I am recording this so you can look back on it, and Mary will also share her slides so I can share those with all of you once I get them.
Yeah. Yeah, we have students sometimes almost, and maybe you've had this experience with things in your life, get paralyzed because they think it needs to be perfect or they don't want to share it until it's perfect. And that's not the case. We see people who are at the very beginning stages of writing a resume to those who are really just honing in on some last details. And we'll just meet you where you're at and help you progress and move it forward. Okay. In our office, I'm not going to go through all these details, but the range of kind of things and reasons you might reach out to us. So for sure, resumes and cover letters. If you're working on a LinkedIn profile or a Handshake profile, we'll talk about in a second. We can give you feedback on that. Interviewing skills. If you're going to apply to a graduate program in the future and you need assistance or someone to review essays for those applications, all of those would be in the purview of reasons you might want to connect with our office. So we give you some overview here of what we do. And then I also wanted to let you know, along with all of your other courses on Brightspace, if you scroll down and click all courses or select self-paced courses, career services will show up. And we have modules on each of these topics. So not modules where we're grading you, just modules that as needed, you can go in and access those resources. So more example resumes or more tips on writing resumes, all those kind of things you would find on Brightspace. The place again, once again, that you'll be sharing your resume is at too many resumes and at. You will share it with resumes@css.edu. My guess right now, 2 to 3 days. I presented to a social work class this morning in your class, but you're on the early side. A lot of students aren't thinking about it right now, which is great. So I would think within 2 to 3 days, we'll get you feedback. In the future, if you have other questions, you can reach out to careers@css.edu, or if you want to reach out to me directly, that's perfectly fine. And my email will be on the presentation when you receive it. Okay, so we're going to do a little on Handshake, a lot on resumes, and then a little bit on cover letters at the end. Handshake, if you have not heard of it or accessed it yet, is the platform we use to post all the jobs and internships that come into us. It is nationwide. It's not just Minnesota. It's not just Duluth. Many colleges use it, so it's geared for folks pursuing a 4-year degree or sometimes a master's degree. So the beauty is an employer, let's say Epic has an entry-level position that could be for HIM or computer science. They create the position, and then they select all the schools they want that position to go out to. So it's a really nice system for that. It's not the only system or place you want to look for jobs and internships. It would just be one tool that you could use in that process. We also use it to schedule appointments. We also use it to do some registration for job and internship fairs. So I wanted to give you enough about the platform that you could go back, check it out, and see if it would be helpful for you. The basic steps are pretty easy to set up a Handshake profile. You would start by going to css.joinhandshake.com. One of the nice things about this particular technology is it's single sign-on, so you use your same CSS sign-in credentials. You don't need to create and remember one more password. And it will pull in some basic information about you already, and then you're just adding to that profile. If for some reason you're searching in a different way, and you're looking for the school name, it doesn't have the word "the" in front of it. It's College of St. Scholastica, which is tricky with the college name. We never know how it's going to show up in different sites. But if you go css.joinhandshake.com, it should populate right into our page. You click, you use your normal sign-in credentials. Okay, so the steps. First step, to make it really easy, you go into the platform. Second step, under your picture, and at this point, it would probably just have your last name initial or something in there. You'll want to go under settings and privacy, and you have the choice of having it open to community, employers, or private. For most of you, if you're actively looking for a job or internship, I'd select community. But if you're getting annoyed with employers reaching out to you, you're not actively looking, anytime you want, you can switch it back to private again. You can also select just employers so your classmates can't see you. I always think it's helpful to do community because you can actually look at how other students are setting up their profile. You can do some networking with one another, and employers can find you. But always your choice of how public or private you want it to be. Third step. You'll want to go back in and build a profile. It will look a lot like LinkedIn if you're utilizing LinkedIn at all. So sort of a cross between LinkedIn and Facebook, I guess, but it's all professional. You're not posting pictures or sharing, your family trip. It's all just about your experiences. We encourage you to add at least one work or volunteer experience. That's one of the sections. There'll be a section on skills. I would shoot for at least 10. And these can be concrete skills. It could be like database modeling, or it could be Excel spreadsheets, but it could also be things like communication, problem solving, attention to detail, supervision, management. Often you start with a few and it will start feeding you additional skills that you might want to consider. And then one organization or extracurricular with a goal of at least 3. So if you go 3 work and volunteer, 10 skills, and 3 more organizations extracurricular, it's a really nice full profile. So what I'd actually have you think about is you do the resume assignment for this class. And once you have this beautiful document, you go back and you can just cut and paste from that document into Handshake. It's really slick and easy. I think the first 5 steps would take you about 15 minutes if you had your resume done, because you can just cut and paste things over. You do want to put a profile picture on when we talk about resumes. No picture on resumes, yes, pictures on Handshake, which is a little confusing. And the picture doesn't have to be something you go out and pay money for. It's simply just a headshot of you with a nice solid background. So avoid things where you're, it's from a wedding and you're trying to cut out the person next to you. Try to get something that really is just your head and shoulders. Avoid you and a pet. Avoid you with a really busy background. So just like these, most of these, I think one was from her athletics. Dylan did it on campus. Julia found a straight background. I can't remember where the other student did his picture. So don't feel like you have to get money for a professional picture, but it's just head and shoulders. After that, those are the basic steps. If you're like, this is great, I've done that, what would I do next if I wanted to? There's a section in there called My Journey, and it would sound or read very much like an elevator pitch. So if you're not familiar with that term, if you hop on an elevator with someone and you have 4 floors to have a conversation, what would you say? How would you introduce yourself? So you think about the first floor is your name, your major, what school, what major you're pursuing. Floor 2 is a little bit more about yourself, some part-time jobs, activities, volunteer things that you're doing. Floor 3, something else interesting about you. And by the time you get to the 4th floor, you're making your pitch. I'm really looking for a full-time job or a new job or a promotion or internship. So that's the same way your elevator pitch, if you're introducing yourself, would sound. You're going to write it out in the My Journey section of Handshake. So you could do that as a next step. If you want to do even more after that, you can list courses and projects, and you can upload a finished resume into Handshake. So those would take another 10 or 15 minutes to do. The first profile really quick. It won't take you long at all to set that up. You will find that we start pushing positions and fairs out for this site as well. So you can look for jobs and jobs will come to you. And again, if it starts to get annoying, you make it private because you're not looking for something at the time. Then remember to switch it back to public in the future. Okay. Pause here. Questions? You can just unmute if you do. Okay, good. Let's move to the bulk of the material, which is on resume writing. So maybe to start with, to make sure you're keeping engaged for me and for you, in chat, would you list, first I want you to think about where you're at in resume writing. If you haven't started or you have a draft or you're changing, and like if there's a lot of change or I'm nearly done, I want you in the chat to, between the number 1 and 5, rank where you think you are in terms of the development of your resume. 5 would be, I think I'm pretty much done. I might need one more look at it. 1 is, I need to start, or I have something from 20 years ago that I'm scrapping and I want to start over, or anywhere in between there, 2, 3, 4. Okay, great. Would someone who said that you think you're at a 5 share with the class what motivated you to get to the 5?
I'll share.
Yeah, Keisha?
So what motivated me to get to the 5. I recently have an interview for a director's position, so I updated my resume. I think it looks pretty good. So
That's great.
It's all up to date. I'm sure there can be some tweaking with it, but I think for the most part, it's pretty good.
That's great. And you probably have, at minimal, we know you have all your most recent content in there because you've updated it for a recent position. And then you can decide based on our conversation if you want to change format at all. Okay,
Yep.
great. Chloe, were you going to jump in as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say basically the same thing as Keisha. I actually accepted a new position just this previous Monday. So my resume is definitely as up to date as I can possibly have it. So yeah.
That's great. So one of the things I find, if people say 5, it's usually because they recently applied for something because that's what motivates us to get things done, right? I had a position. Rest of us are sitting, either we're starting or at about a 3, because it's like, well, it's okay, but I haven't had to look at it for a number of years. So again, the beauty of having courses like this that integrate it, it forces you to do some updates, and you'll be very happy later on when you're applying for positions. Okay, the next question I have for you, if you want to just, if you have these, put it in chat. Are there some specific things you want to make sure that I cover related to resume writing? So is there something you've been thinking about, like how far back should I go? Or what's the newest trend for length of resume? Those kind of questions. If you want to just add those in. As you're thinking of that, Keisha and Chloe and others of you that maybe have recently done it, feel free to jump in and give tips along with me, because it's fresh on your mind. You've just updated yours too. What type of resume, how far back, font, number of pages, good. Okay. Let me answer some of those right away, and then some will be integrated into the presentation. How long should it be? 1 to 2 pages. It depends a little bit how much experience you have and what field you're going into. So for some of you, it would be healthcare and you have a fair amount of work experience, so there's a chance you might be going to 2 pages. Others of you, if you're newer, younger in the profession, it might just be 1 page, and that's just fine. Don't feel like a longer resume makes you look more impressive. So don't add sort of garbage to make it longer to make you look more impressive. Really, employers appreciate a 1-page resume, but sometimes people have enough experience that can justify 2. For most of you, because you're going into healthcare or a nonprofit or a sort of maybe an educational role, 1 to 2 pages. If you shift gears, not even shift, but for some of you, if you move into like insurance roles where you're using your degree with a big insurance company, more likely they'd like 1 page. It's like the bigger the business, the more traditionally conservative, the more likely they want 1 page. If you go to 2 pages, make sure you have at least a third of a page on the second page to justify that you've gone to a second page. So if you write and you have like 3 lines on page 2, we're going to go back and change format to make sure you can keep it all on 1 page. Okay, how far back? I'm going to give you some general rules of thumb, and then it's always comma, it depends. Generally, if you went right from high school into a college degree program, you're just putting your college experiences or the last 4 years. If you're someone who's been out working, you've done some maybe a degree, and now you're coming back, but you've worked in between, generally about 10 years of experience, but there's always exceptions to that. So for example, I've been in my job for 20 years now. I'm not going to skip what I did in the first 10 years. I'm going to include some details about the job. I started as a career counselor, 13 years ago. I'm still going to include that, but a lot less information than the job I've had for the last 13 years. So roughly 10 years. The reason they use that guideline is they feel like if it's a job that you're doing something very different now, the skills have probably changed and you've probably lost some of that content knowledge. However, it can build the story of who you are and how you got to this place. So I'd say you can go back farther. It's just going to be that you'll have less bullets and less descriptions for those older positions. Okay. Font and font size. What's your guess? You can put this in as the smallest font size employers tell us they want to read on a resume. Any guesses? Not the font style, but the font size.
12.
12, 12, 11, 11. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the smallest they'll read is 10. The preference is 11. It used to be 12. This is a very interesting thing to me. It's changed over the years. When I started, it was always 12, and now 11 is much more common. What people often do is do their header in 12 and the content underneath of it at an 11 font size. So you kind of stand out the education experience sections within there. So I think that works really well. References are a separate standalone document. It does not need to be part of your resume. You might use the same name letterhead that you used at the top of your resume, but it would be a separate document. You can provide that when they're requested. Sometimes that is at application, sometimes at the interview process. And cover letters. I find the higher the level of the position, the more likely they want a cover letter. So I think for most of you, the positions you're applying for right now will request or require a cover letter. I think anytime you have the opportunity to do a cover letter, as long as you have enough time to do it well, it's worth it, because it's one more opportunity to share a little bit about yourself. Now, let's say you found a position and the deadline is midnight tonight and you want to apply for it. You have your resume done, but it doesn't require a cover letter. You might skip it because you might feel like I can't do it justice. I want quality documents. I'm just going to submit the resume. But in general, I think for all of you, I would expect that you're going to need or be required to put a cover letter in with your applications. Okay. The rest of these I'm going to address as we go through. So there's lots of different types of applications and writing materials you might do within the application process. You will hear people talk about a CV sometimes. That stands for curriculum vitae, which is a Latin term for course of life. It's mostly used for faculty and academia. Sometimes in other countries, they use CVs more than we do. CV is long and includes everything you've ever done, courses you've taught, research you've been part of, committees that you've been on. Most of you at this point are probably doing a resume, 1 to 2 pages. Cover letters are really the narration that goes along with that. If you think of the resume, sort of the facts about your education, experience, and background, the cover letter makes the sort of the connection between your experiences and the job you're applying for. You're convincing the employer that you're really interested in their particular organization and the positions that is posted, and making a case about why your background would be a good fit. In the future, if you apply for a graduate program, you might have to do an essay called a personal statement. And so they'll ask very specific questions, why are you interested in our program, or what do you bring to this program? How do your past experiences prepare you well? So if you do that in the future, you can reach back out and we'll talk about that. And then some fields do a lot with portfolios. This would be a collection of sort of artifacts that prove your experiences. Do you do portfolios, Katie? I can't remember if you're doing anything like that in this class. Not really. So you might, if you have friends that are art majors, computer science majors, education majors, this is really common because they're providing documentation of a program that they've developed or an art piece that they've had displayed at a opening, something like that. So keep that in mind if you hear other people talk about it. I don't hear it requested in your field very often, so I don't think you'll have to worry about it. For all of those, regardless, it is about strong communication skills. So taking enough time, put some effort into it, be thoughtful, have several people check through for errors and typos. The length, we talked about this because you asked this question already. The only other thing that I add to what I've already said is if you do go to 2 pages, make sure you have your name somewhere on the second page, maybe a running header or a running footer, so that if someone's old school and they print out documents, you want to make sure they connect your 2 pages together. Readability, we already talked about the font size, 10 or larger, 11 is sort of the nice happy mark. Other things we find is when you're writing a paper, almost always they say 1-inch margins. In a resume, you're going to read that's the guideline, but it really is only a guideline for resumes. Your name is like a letterhead, so it can rise closer to the top of the page. You really can get away with a 1/2-inch margin up on the top. Left, right, 0.8 is about as small that you'd want to go for left, right margins. Bottom margin, you could get away with 0.5, 0.8. This is particularly helpful if you keep just going like 2 lines over on the second page. We're going to go back and modify margins just a little bit. Anything smaller than that, it starts to look too crowded. So that would be my rule of thumb for margins. I would use bold and capitalization and some italics, but don't go too overboard with it. Do enough that it helps break up the text and it guides the reader through your document. So maybe you always put the name of your job title in bold and the place or the organization you italicize and then you're going to have bullets underneath. It just is easier for the readers they go through. And then bullets, I would encourage you to do bullets instead of paragraph. What we find and hear from employers is they just don't read the paragraph. They'd rather look through a sort of set of bullets so they can scan through it. Keisha, was yours in bulleted format when you did your resume? Yeah, you can just nod,
Yes.
that's fine. Yes. Okay. How about for you, Chloe?
Yeah, mine was definitely it had the bolding, underlining. I think I italicized a couple things, like
Yep.
dates maybe, and then
Mhm.
bullet points underneath that.
Yeah. If you've used paragraph in the past, it's actually like not illegal to use paragraph. It's just that we know the readers of these documents say it's easier for us if they do bullets. So we'll talk a little bit about how to write effective bulleted descriptions. Here's the sections we're going to go through this together. So the easy thing to start with is your name. You do want this to be the biggest, the largest thing on your document. So your name can be big, bold, 18, 20, 22 font size. You want to make sure people know it's you. If they have a connection to you, you want it to read like it's your personalized letterhead up at the top. After that, the two things you'll want to include for sure would be your email and a phone number. Historically, we've always said, and your mailing address. Now, I usually say, unless you're submitting it to a specific position, skip your mailing address, protect your privacy. They don't necessarily need to know where you live at this point, and employers aren't sending things out to you. And if they are, it's later in the application process. So I would probably just do phone and email, up to you if you want to list a mailing address. Email, you can use your CSS email if you choose to, but if you do, every 6 months, you have to make sure you're logging into it, and you have to log in from a computer, not just your phone, to keep it active. You can also use a personal email address, that's fine. Just make sure it's an appropriate email address. So if it's something you created, when you were 7 and you no longer want it to be soccer girl 3, whatever your jersey number was, might be time to change that to something else. The other interesting thing with if you're actively applying for jobs, they often call you to offer you an interview. So make sure you have an outgoing message on your cell phone. They like to know it's you they've really reached before they leave a message. If you're using LinkedIn actively and you're like your profile and you're comfortable and confident with it, you could also include your LinkedIn URL on your resume. And you can have it right now where you don't. And then if you work on it in the future, you could add it back in again. Okay, questions on that? Yeah.
Where exactly do you put the LinkedIn and the social media information? Like
Yeah,
up there
like
with your name?
yeah, I would do it up there with the name. So if you think about it, at the top would be like your name, big and bold, and underneath, separated by like a vertical line or a bullet point or something, it'd be like email bullet, phone number bullet, and that LinkedIn URL. If you're using LinkedIn, one of the things, if you don't know this already, you can customize that URL. Like LinkedIn will assign you one, but it's usually longer and has some sort of garbage characters in there. And instead, you could customize it and try to make it just your first and last name, so it shrinks it up. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Things generally not to include, and again, this is in the US, things that you wouldn't include. So hobbies and social interests, you're not going to include anything about your age, a picture, height, weight. Avoid these religious and politically sensitive areas unless it's really relevant to the job. Don't try to get too cute. Make sure everything is honest. You can get rid of language like I was responsible for, or my duties included. You skip that and you just jump right into the action verb. All of these have exceptions. Again, there are some countries where you put more personal information. So if you're ever applying abroad, we'll research the process and trends for that country to make sure you're up to date on that. Okay, after that, the next section should be your education. In the past, some of you maybe put your experience in front of it. I would say right now in your career path, I would put education next. It is what likely is making you qualified or newly qualified for positions. So I like to put that right up at the top after your name. You only need to include information on degrees that you've completed, or are pursuing currently. So let's say you took 2 courses at a community college and then transferred it somewhere. They don't care about that. But let's say you completed a 2-year degree. Some of you have that. I would include that. It's always reverse chronological within every header, which means you'd say education, and you're going to include CSS first, St. Scholastica first. And then underneath that would be any previous degrees that you've achieved. So always your most recent to least recent within that education header. When you list out the college, it officially has the word "the" in front of it, and Saint is usually just ST period instead of spelling it all out. Your degree, Bachelor of Science degree. Some folks at this college also get Bachelor of Arts degrees, but you're getting a Bachelor of Science degree. If your GPA is above a 3.0, I think it's nice to highlight it. If you've been on the dean's list, if you've received some achievements related to your education, it's nice to showcase that. All of these things you can think through the eye of the reader. Like, would adding this tell more of the story about who I am? Or is it something that would be confusing or not really make sense to an employer? Then you skip it. So let's say you received Benedictine scholarship. That's great, but I don't think an employer knows what it is or really cares about it necessarily. So I would skip that on your resume versus some recognition at work for being the top employee or the dean's list. That's something that people would understand. So you can always think it through that way. After that, the sections would be about experiences. And this is one piece that might be different for some of you if you haven't worked on a resume for a while. I would highly encourage you to think about splitting your experiences between relevant and supporting. The reason why that's helpful is if you have a category called relevant experience, you can bring everything that's most related to what you're applying for up to the top of the resume. And then you have another category like other experience or supporting experience. Some of you might not have that much experience and you're just going to put it in one chunk. That's okay. It's like the more experiences that you have, the more likely you can divide those up. So relevant experience might be anything you've had in the medical profession, anything related to computer science or IT, patient registration. I mean, all those kind of things would likely be irrelevant. Supporting experience might be things like I've worked 3 years at Starbucks, or I did 2 summers of landscaping. You might still want folks to know that because it shows something about your work ethic or your ability to work with customers or be in a fast-paced environment, but you could put it in a different category with no bullets or fewer bullets. And the things that are relevant, you're going to add more description. The other beauty, if you use a phrase or a header like relevant experience instead of work experience, you can put both paid and unpaid experiences in there. So if you did an unpaid internship or unpaid volunteer role, or you're in a leadership role within your professional organization that was pretty significant, you might pull that up under relevant experiences. And it would be legal as long as you're not saying it was a paid job. You'd say, HIM or Health Information, HEMA, American Health Information Management, board chair, Minnesota chapter, whatever it is. So they'll understand that some of those are paid and some are unpaid experiences. As you go through, you want to be consistent with your verb tense when you start to describe each of those experiences. Present tense if you're currently in the job, and past tense if it's something from the past. So if you're currently doing it, you're going to say assist, guide, manage, supervise. If it was a job from in the past, assisted, managed, supervised. The dates really just need to be month and year. You don't need an exact date. So if Chelsea had a job that started October 13th, 2023, you don't need to say October 13th. You can just say October 23 to present, or whatever the end date was for that position. So it just cleans it up a little bit. If you ever had a position that was just like summer, instead of putting all the dates, you could say summer 2023 instead of trying to navigate the specific dates for that. Okay, I'm going to talk about bulleted descriptions in a slide in just a second. Okay. The supporting experience section, again, that could be jobs you've had for a while but less related, part-time jobs that tell something about you and your skills. Sometimes, again, you just list it with no bulleted description, and sometimes you do add bullets to describe that. In addition to those, some folks will have a whole other section, and it depends on your background. You might have had a lot of volunteer experience, and maybe you were actually, it's a good example, you were staying at home with kids for 5 years, but during that time you did a lot of leadership at the schools, maybe you helped out in different ways in the classroom. You might have a longer section on like community volunteering, something like that. For others of you, maybe you've been really involved in robotics team. I would include that. Maybe you're an Eagle Scout. Maybe you've been involved in music. You don't include as much space on your resume, but it sort of rounds you out. It's like, here's who I am as a student, as someone who's been in the field, and here's some other things you might want to know about me. You don't need to say like the hobby club, hobby interests, things like, what would I put? Enjoys kayaking, watching Netflix and flicks, and taking great naps. Like, you're not going to put those kind of things. I would tell you that in an interview, but you probably wouldn't put it on a resume. Yeah, so more things that would be interesting to someone. Sometimes those are great conversation starters. Okay. Objectives and summaries. This is very interesting to me because it ebbs and flows and it changes with the times. In the past, this is something we had most students doing. At the top of your resume, you might have objective, seeking full-time position in health information management at St. Luke's Hospital, like you name it. But almost always now you're applying to an online system and you've just referenced or checked which position you're applying for, and then you're uploading a resume. So there's no need to say what position. The reason it can be helpful is if you ever use a resume at a conference, or maybe you're going to a job fair, it can help people know what you're looking for. Summaries are more useful if you have had some work experience, because then you're summarizing some things like 10 years successful experience supervising teams of 5 or larger, proven ability to improve process and efficiencies, including, and then you name a couple of your process or procedures you've improved. It's harder if you don't really have anything to summarize yet. And sometimes that's covered in a cover letter, so it's not really necessary. So I'm going to pause again. Any of you that felt like you're about 4 or 5 on your resume, do you have a summary or do you have an objective? And if so, would you be willing to share with the group what you used for that? You can see Keisha's no. Okay. Yeah. So you may be doing what I'm already suggesting and people aren't using them as much. If you ever feel like, Mary, I think that would fit for me or for the circumstances, then we can work to craft that. What I think isn't very effective on those is if you use general language like dedicated student, committed to strong communication skills and teamwork in a thriving environment. It's like, well, kind of everybody should be able to say that. So if you're going to do it, you want to make it more specific and more unique to you. And again, if I say something like that, and you're like, oh, darn, that's what I have. No shame, no embarrassment, but just for you to think through, yeah, that is kind of vague. I don't think it tells enough about me specifically. Okay, references we talked about. The parts that we didn't talk about, generally 3 to 4 seems to be the number requested by employers. These should be folks who have supervised you or advised you or taught you or coached you in some way, generally not friends and family. You always want to ask those folks first, would you be willing to be a reference for me? And then if it's for graduate programs, they might be requesting a reference letter. In that case, you want to give the person lots of lead time. I would say at least a month lead time before the letter is due. If it's for a job, it's usually just saying, would you be willing to be listed as a reference for me? The person says yes. Then you ask, what contact information should I share? You know, what phone number, what email? And then I would follow up with, is there any way that I can make this easier for you? Is there any documentation? Do you want a copy of my resume? Do you want to know each time I apply for a position? Okay. Then when you write it out, this is probably a little small for you to see. It's, I think, really helpful if you have the person's name, their title, their contact information, and then their relationship to you. Like, Dr. Simmons supervised me on a research project and was also the advisor for the music club I'm involved in. So that's helpful, I think, as folks are making calls, like how is this person connected to you? So when I send this out, you'll be able to see that a little bit clearer. You don't have to see these. I just want you to get a glance at all the different looks that you could use on a resume. So these are kind of nice. They have some shaded areas. So it's name big up at the top, education, relevant, and supporting experience. This one has a lot more white space. This was a much younger student who had less experience. It's like the more experience you have, the less white space you likely will have on your resume. This one was someone who had a lot of experiences. They chose their headers as education and training, relevant experience, supporting experience, and leadership experience. And again, each one of you can think through, how would I summarize the background that I have? Okay. Another one that's in kind of a 2-column format. I find this isn't very efficient with your space. It's better if you're trying to fill because you don't have much experience, and not as good if you have quite a few things to share. Okay. Okay, I want to talk about bulleted descriptions and how to write those effectively, but I want to pause again. You can type it in or you can unmute. Any other questions at this point?
Mary, I don't know if you're going to get into it with, this topic as far as bulleted statements, but a lot of chatter just recently on, the job market and how to apply for things, with recruiters being, I don't know if replaced is the right word, but just the whole topic of artificial intelligence and how they screen job applications and like what specific words that you want to put into a resume in order to capture that AI's attention and say, yes, we should interview this person. Is that something
Yes, that's
to
great.
consider?
It is, and I'm going to send a separate handout to Katie to share with you all. We actually, in our newest, we just updated all our handouts. We have a whole new handout just on this topic. And there's 2 pieces for you to think about. One is how they read documents. So we did some research and found some resources that talked about these AI, artificial intelligence, agencies that are looking through the document do not read 2 columns well at all. So you don't want to use a 2-column format, which there's some nice cool 2-column resumes that look cool, but I guess it's very difficult. They read left and right, just like this. You don't want to use a font size or style that's very unique or creative. It doesn't read as well. You want to match terminology of the job position, which we'd always say, but it's even more important. So if you look at a job description, you want to go through and circle or highlight the words they are using and try to use those exact terms in your resume. So if they describe something using, you might say, database modeling and management, and they say in a slightly different way, but it means the same thing. I try to use their language as long as it indeed is about the same thing. If they talk about collaboration and teamwork as being a skill they're looking for, make sure you use that language in your bulleted descriptions. It's probably all things you've done. So you're not lying by doing that. You're just choosing words that match the same words that they're looking for. There was something else that they had in the newest. It was color doesn't read well. 2 columns isn't great. Look at keywords. Oh, the headers. This was interesting to me. Like we usually say, relevant experience and leadership, that's fine. Some people had clever things like other things you should know about me, and the computer can't read that. They don't know what that means. Bullets were fine. Bolding was fine. There's a couple other things. I'll make sure to share it. I think you can imagine it's the larger companies and hospital systems that would use this. So if you're thinking about massive hospital systems, they might be using it. If you're applying to really big insurance companies, they might be using these systems. And you don't want to be kicked out because you didn't include the right 3 words. The other thing that I remember, one other thing that was clever, they said, if you think you can trick the system, just don't do it. So here's the example that someone shared is they took the whole job description, they copied it, they put it in their resume, and they changed the font to white. So the computer still picks up on every word from that job description, but they put it like on the background of their resume, which I'm like, well, that's kind of a clever way to think about it. And then on top of it, they overwrote it and put their actual resume. So then the idea was that the software would pick up on every word from the job description and get a match. But if they find that, then they're like, okay, this is, someone's trying to get around the system. So don't try to do that because apparently they can pick up on those things too. The other thing I forgot, it's not exactly related to this, but a little bit. In your field, another section that I'd encourage you to have on your resume is technology. You could have a whole section called either relevant courses or technology skills and background. And you can list the actual programming languages you've learned, database systems you've used. If you've used patient software systems, make sure to name them specifically. So don't just say I've used electronic medical systems, name the ones that you've utilized. If you're hesitant because there's some that you have more or less skills in, you can say technology skills and then have subheaders like proficient, and you name that. Basic background or background introduction to. So if you're hesitant because you're not proficient, just name it. Name what level you're at. Some of you might also have not just technology languages, but second languages that you speak and understand. I would also include that on your resume. So you could have additional skills, technology, blah, 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 languages, fluent in, and name the languages, or conversational in the languages. Those can be nice selling points for you in a position. Okay. Keep thinking of questions. These are great. So the bulleted descriptions, you come up with the format that you like and the groupings of how you think you're going to outline these things. The bulleted descriptions, you want to move away from what could read like a task list from your job, because you instead want to focus on the skills you used, what you're proud of, improvements you made within that organization. So I'm going to give you a couple ideas of how to do that. One of the first things I think that makes sense is for you to pause and think about, what am I most proud of in this position? What did I really excel at? Or where did I get positive feedback from a supervisor, a coworker, or a colleague? Those are the kind of things you really want to focus in on. Then you're going to start each bullet with an action verb. I will give you some resources when I share the presentation, because sometimes you get stuck on 2 or 3 action verbs, and it's really nice to have a variety of those that you use. So you might be saying supervise, manage, led, organize, assisted, trained, whatever that might be. Then you want to jump into the details. Usually a bulleted description shouldn't run longer than 2 lines, so 1 to 2 lines of description. When you can, quantify. If there's a number you would like to include, let's say instead of training staff, it's important to say train 20 new staff per year. Okay, that gives me a much better sense of how many people you are training in. So if numbers are helpful, include that. Include adverbs and adjectives to describe or the results of your behavior. So because I did this, it ensured what? What did that look like? So instead of just saying, listen to clients' concerns about product line, you would say, listen to up to 30 clients' concerns daily about product line. Instead of saying, answer telephone and direct calls, how big of a system? How many calls are you doing? What does that look like? Another example, a person might say, in their job, I met with lots of different types of people. Or I served over 50 clients of diverse backgrounds, ages, and educational levels. Or built rapport, and tailored approach to effectively serve 50 clients from diverse backgrounds, ages, and educational levels. So that it's one example. That's how you build out really strong bulleted descriptions. So think about what was the task, what skill did I have to use to do that, and then how do I form that into a description that said, here's how I used it, or because I did this, I ensured something happened. So it could be utilize strong attention to detail to oversee X number of files per day to inspect for errors, blah, 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 whatever it would be in your field. It could be about communication skills, selected to train in up to 5 new staff per month based on strong communication skills and expertise in the position. So then it's not just that you train, but you were selected to do the training. Supervised 10 staff, and then which departments or which areas, or how large were those areas. So every one of you has different positions and descriptions, but you're thinking about what did you do? What did you do well? Which of those skills are most relevant to new positions that you're applying for? The other thing that's helpful is to think about in your specific field, are there sort of language that is used over and over again? So is it about, things like confidentiality? Is it about checking for errors and making a system more efficient? Is it about training and development with people of different levels? And how would you describe that? Is it your ability to analyze large amounts of information to make decisions? Is it your ability to analyze a lot of information and then synthesize that for a supervisor to make a decision on a process or procedure? So again, every one of you has different jobs. If you've had jobs and you're like, you know what, most of my jobs are more like working at Subway or Starbucks, that's okay. Every one of those you have transferable skills in. So let's use Starbucks. If I think about someone who's worked at Starbucks, again, you have to have excellent communication skills. You have to be able to manage in a fast-paced environment. You have to work as part of a team, and you have to learn lots of detailed sort of menu items and be able to probably oversee some money exchange. So you're going to choose some of those to highlight. I don't care necessarily that you know how to make a great mocha, although that's great if I come to your store, but it's more the skills that you know how to have great customer service when I ask for some exception, or when something goes wrong, or someone is angry, or you have to troubleshoot something. Those are the skills that will be more transferable to your next job. Okay. Okay, we talked about that. We've already talked about that. Katie's seen me use this one image before, and I just use it for class. And I have to laugh because, again, I asked someone recently for feedback. And then as they were giving me feedback, I was like, I don't think I actually wanted this. I shouldn't have asked them if I wasn't willing to hear their feedback. So when you're working on your resume, if you can actually be open to people's feedback, take it in, make the adjustments to make it an even stronger document. Of course, that is the goal. All right. We talked about it depends already. Cover letters. In brief, this would be a document that is 1 page. Don't feel overwhelmed with it. Most people do. They're staring at this blank sheet of paper, document on your computer. It really is only about 3 to 5 paragraphs, 10 to 12 sentences. You are sharing a little bit about yourself, an introduction. You are telling the employer why you are interested in them, the organization's mission or who they serve, their reputations, some connection you have with them, and then why they should consider you, why your background, your enthusiasm, your eagerness to learn, your education prepares you well for this particular position. And then you're ending with, thank you for your time and consideration. I look forward to hearing from you in the future. When you write it, this might be small, but this tiny little graphic, the most common format is single space, double space between paragraphs, and everything is flush right. So unlike a paper that might be double space and you're indenting, traditionally a cover letter is all single spaced and flush to the left. In terms of who you address it to, Oh, I didn't put this on this one. Best if you can find a specific person. So if you knew I was the supervisor, you might say, Dear Mary Anderson. Or if you knew it was, you knew the title of the person, Dear Professor so-and-so, Dear Dr. so-and-so. We have moved away from trying to use or assume that we know the preferred identification, Mr. or Ms. or Mrs. So better just to use first name, last name. If you can't find the person, then you might just say, Dear Hiring Manager, Dear Internship Coordinator, something like that, Dear Human Resources Manager. You can say to whom it may concern, but that's getting more dated. Most people aren't using that. Instead, one of these other generic terms like Dear Hiring Manager. If you can find the name, even better. What you don't want to do in a cover letter is spend too much time on why the thing would benefit you, why the position. This would be a great position for me to build my experiences as a stepping stone in my career path. That may all be true, but they don't necessarily want to hear that. They want to hear that you're excited about the position and you're bringing skills to the position that will be utilized, that will be effective. So make sure it's not all just about you and what you'll get out of it, but this two-way exchange. The other thing you want to avoid in the cover letter is just using one over and over again. They can tell, so you have to tweak and adjust it for every position. And it might seem obvious because if you're going to talk about why you're interested in them, of course you have to tailor it for each position. So make sure you spend a little bit of time in that section. Okay, I'm going to stop there, but open it up for more questions. Resumes, cover letters, handshake, or something else you're thinking about related to applications. How about those of you who have applied to something recently? Any other tips like, don't forget to do this, or I found this was really useful? One thing I hear from students, I'm just writing 2 notes to myself, is you do a lot of work on the resume and cover letter, and then you get to the application and you still have to fill in all these fields on an application. And you just have to. It's annoying and frustrating, but they want you both to upload a resume and to fill in all the fields on the standard application. So make sure you do both of those. Nicole, did you have a question?
I do. Would you recommend listing your certifications in the education section or do a separate section?
You can do either. If you put it in your education section, I might change the header to that to education and certifications. So then I would just name it there. Other people will use a whole different category and just call it certifications. I think either is fine. If you do a whole different category though, you'd want more than like 2 certifications, or it might look like a waste of space to make a whole new category just for 2 certifications. But if you have 3 or 4, it could be a category by itself.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. I have my RHIT. So when I do like Jennifer Hicks, can I do like a comma RHIT or do I need to leave that off?
No, I would include that. Do you agree, Katie, to include that?
Definitely. Actually, before Jennifer asked that, I was thinking about a resume I reviewed not that long ago, and she was an RHIT and didn't include it. And I'm like, definitely put that after your name. Any of those credentials you've earned, call those out on your name at the top of the resume.
Yeah, that's great. Another thing I forgot to talk about is when you are, let's say you're nearly done with your resume or you're done with it, you're ready to save it because now you have to upload it to an application system. Usually follow their directions, but usually you save it as a PDF and then save it with just like your first name and last name. Occasionally they'll ask for it in a different format, but that seems to be the most common. It preserves your formatting and then they can see your name right off. That would be true for both resumes and cover letters. What else? Did someone else have their hand up? I thought so. No. If you have other questions that you're hesitant to ask in front of the whole group, so you're like, what about that job I got fired from 10 years ago? just reach out to me and we'll have that conversation privately. There's lots of those situations that happen for people. It does not mean that you won't be employable, but we want to talk about how you address that on a resume. Or you're like, I've had several different jobs. Should I be including all of them or some of them? Some of those get more complicated. I'm happy to answer those individually if you don't want to be sharing with the whole group.
I do think that's a common thing, especially with our online students who have had longer careers. And yeah, how far back do I go? That's a really common thing. And if I go far back, how much information do I include? So
Yes.
definitely reach out to Mary.
Yeah, I think we can just look through some of those individually and
Mhm.
decide, yep, I do want to include it, but I don't need to include all the bullets because it tells the story versus ones that you can just skip. That's kind of the beauty on the resume. You don't need to include everything you've all done through your whole lifetime. However, if you skip too much, it might look like you have big gaps in your work history.
Yeah.
And if we see too much of that, then that's a red flag. So there's a balance between those two. One other thing's related to that. So let's say I use the example, someone stayed at home for 5 years with kids, and they're coming back, getting education, getting ready to re-enter. I might just address that in the cover letter. If you're concerned someone's going to be making up their own story about you, you might just have a short line in the cover letter. I was privileged to take 5 years away from my field to stay at home with children. Last year, I returned to complete my education. I'm excited to re-enter the health information management field or the work field or something like that. We can make it a little nicer than that, but then you just name it so they're not questioning it. Okay. Thanks for hanging in there. 5 to 6 for me. I know you might be in different time zones, right? I don't know where everybody's coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah. Reach out with questions. Take the knowledge and information I shared, update your resume, and then share it with our office, and we'll give you a round of feedback.
Can I ask you real quick, what time is your office open? What time is the office open? I'm online in North Carolina, so I know I'm an hour behind you guys, but what's the hours of the center?
Yeah, that's a great question. Standard hours, 8 to 4:30, Monday through Friday. But if there's ever a time that you need a later evening because you're working, as long as we know in advance, we can arrange for that. So I guess yours would be the opposite because we're earlier than you. But yeah, so if there's ever someone who's like, I cannot get away from the workday, could you meet me at 5:30? As long as we know in advance, we can schedule that too. Or over the lunch hour, or occasionally first thing in the morning, which I don't mind, but you all, maybe you're morning people, maybe you're not, but I'm happy to do an early morning time too. I'm actually better at about 7:30 than I am at 5:30, so. Great. Anything else from you, Katie? Things that I missed?
I don't think so. I think you
Okay.
covered it all, but thank you so much, Mary. I appreciate your
Yes.
Can you give it
time and
email address one more time that we supposed to email it to? Resume at
oh,
CSS.
resumes, plural, right, Mary?
That's right.
At css.edu.
That's right.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mhm. Awesome.
All
Have a good
right.
evening. Look forward to seeing your resumes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks to everyone. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.